Let's look at some background information. This will help us understand the author and the era he was writing in. It will provide us with some useful historical context to use when thinking about his novel.
The Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson was born in 1850, during the Victorian era. Often when we think about the people living at this time, we're encouraged to think of low hems and high collars. We think of good manners and strict morals. This can easily be seen in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which explores morality and reputation in Victorian society.
Stevenson also draws upon another Victorian fascination, the Gothic style of literature, which is also known as the Gothic genre. Even if you're unfamiliar with this term, it's likely that you'll recognise many of the Gothic novels. Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein are both good examples of Gothic literature, and they both come from the Victorian era. There's a few important characteristics that help us to define a Gothic story. Gothic literature is always mysterious, and it usually has supernatural elements. Novels in this genre tend to include eerie locations, such as haunted castles or misty woodlands. The characters in the story will often experience extreme emotions. This can be seen through characters fainting, becoming hysterical, or even, as we see in Jekyll and Hyde, dying from shock.
Gothic writing can often reflect the anxieties about the political and social issues of the time. For example, in Jekyll and Hyde, we see science being presented as threatening and dangerous. It is in conflict to the strong moral values found in religion. This would have reflected worries at the time, as science was making significant developments in the Victorian era.
This is better understood when we consider the author's own conflicts with religion and science. Robert Louis Stevenson grew up in a religious family. His grandfather was a minister of the Church of Scotland. When he was a child, he was strongly influenced by his parents' beliefs. However, as he got older, his understanding of religion began to change. By the age of 22, he became disillusioned and declared himself agnostic. This means that, while he did not reject the possibility of a God, he felt that nothing could be known or proven about God's existence. This would have been in direct conflict with his parents' belief. It would also have been a very self-conflicting position given his religious background.
That's not to say that Stevenson's family were closed off to science. In fact, his family also included engineers and scientists. Stevenson's father was a well-respected lighthouse engineer. This means that Stevenson was familiar with both scientific and religious ideas. You can see this when reading Jekyll and Hyde.
Law is also something that Stevenson would have been familiar with. At the age of 17, he abandoned an engineering course he'd started in order to study law. While he never went on to practice law or work in a law-related industry, we can see the impact of his legal knowledge in one of his characters, Mr. Utterson. This character is deliberately created as inquisitive, methodical, and rational-minded.
Do you know what inspired Robert Louis Stevenson to become a writer? Well, from an early age, Stevenson loved reading. He was very fond of travel and adventure stories. This was probably because he had some serious health problems and used reading as a way of escaping his sickness. As he grew older, his love of travel novels developed into a love of travel. He spent a lot of time travelling, partly due to his ill health. While this may seem a bit strange to us now, it was common practice in the Victorian era to travel to warmer climates if you were unwell. This was partly because Victorians felt that travelling abroad or sometimes to the countryside would give you access to cleaner air.
We can interpret Stevenson's changes in occupation, his critique of religion and his love of travel as a desire to escape the strict expectations of family and Victorian society. As a result, we could argue that the characters of Dr. Jekyll and his alternative self or doppelganger, Mr. Hyde, are a means of demonstrating the tension between religion and science, as well as morality and social freedom. After all, in the first few transformations, Mr. Hyde's lack of strict morality certainly seems to be liberating to Dr. Jekyll. The novel illustrates Stevenson's sense of the tension between respectable duty and reckless self-service.
Stevenson wrote Jekyll and Hyde in 1886 while he was bedridden with tuberculosis. The eerie Gothic nature of the story may well have been influenced by his dark journey through his illness and the strong medication he was on. He claimed that the plot was inspired by a fevered nightmare he had. In this nightmare, he saw a man change into a monster after taking a white powder.
The novel, which was published in 1887, brought Stevenson great critical acclaim and sold over 40,000 copies in the first 6 months. Many film versions of the novel have been made over the years. The story continues to capture imaginations today.